DreAllDay.com.
You're now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day, to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques all underneath the umbrella of one unified philosophy that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is why the mainstream media is dying. Now, this is a topic that, actually, before I get into that, let me remind you all two things. First of all, my text message number down below in the description. Once we start sending that message out again, you'll be getting it straight to your phone. Secondly, Work on Your Game University. Want to work with me directly? Have me as your direct coach. We work with people who are in the sales world, in finance, in clothing space, in the fitness space, the music space, authors, people who are making coaching programs, people who are teaching music, I mentioned, food space, people who have their own storefronts and businesses, people who are doing their own real estate investing, finance investing. We have a very eclectic group. Why? Because they say, Dre, you keep it real, you're straight to the point, you're very direct, you're organized, you're strategic, and no fluff. That sounds like the kind of person you want to work with. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. And you know I'm not lying because you're listening to my show right now. What you're listening to is this is an example of what you get. Now here I'm talking generally when I talk about the things I say on this show, but when I'm working with you directly, this is what we're doing. So again, go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. Link is down below in the description. With this out of the way, getting to the topic, why the mainstream media is dying. Now this is a topic that I covered actually I talked about this on one of my live streams, by the way. I do live streams 8 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday on whatever app allows live streaming, I do it. So TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Rumble, X, YouTube. So those are all the apps that I know of that allow live streaming. I have accounts on all of them. I do a live stream on all of them at the same time at 8 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. So any of you ever want to catch me live and have me respond to a comment or question of yours, then be on one of those lives. And I talked about this subject in one of those lives, but I wanted to make sure I was on the record for this audience, which is, I tell you all, this is the foundation of anything I've ever thought about, believe, and want to reference people to. So if anyone ever says to me, Dre, have you ever talked about topic X? I won't send them to an 8-minute YouTube video or to a tweet, or even most of the time, not even to an article. I'll send them to an episode of this show because this is where I can continuously say what it is I want to say, put it in full context, but not too long, but it's on the record. So I want to make sure anything I talk about, I make sure I'm on the record somewhere, somehow, through this show right here, this masterclass here. So any of you ever want to know if I've ever talked about a topic, just ask me and I'll tell you what episode number it was. Or if you happen to be the rare person who offers me a suggestion of something that I actually have not talked about, then I'll say that's a good idea. I'll do that one and it'll be coming soon. So what I share here on the show is the library. All right, so which means you better be listening to every episode while you can, because no guarantee these will always be around and openly available, but they'll always be around somehow, some way. So that's why I'm suggesting, you know what I know, you make sure you stay connected. So let me just open up over here. I think I closed something that I should not have closed. And this is, yeah, I got something closed that I shouldn't have closed. All right, so getting into the topic here today, I got to open something up here that I should not have closed. And there it is. We got that, we got that. Oh, I closed the wrong thing. One moment here. All right, so we got that, and there we are. All right, so point number one, topic once again is why the mainstream media is dying. Number one, I've already explained how social media has influenced the mainstream media to play a different game than the game that they used to play. So if you didn't hear my series where I explained, let me go through here. I was talking about how journalism destroyed itself, episode 31, 29, 30, and 31. Again, episode 31, 29, 31, 30, and 30, 31, just maybe a month or so ago. I told you how journalism started to end because people who are supposed to give us the truth, i.e. journalists, they started trying to be influencers. They started to try to gain attention rather than just telling the truth. All right, the truth doesn't always get as much attention as a lie gets or as something that's entertaining gets. But a journalist is supposed to stick to their script. And a journalist shouldn't try to be a clown, and a clown shouldn't try to be a journalist. But a lot of journalists decided to try to be influencers, and this is when they lost the plot. Mainstream media tended to employ a lot of people who considered themselves journalists, and they would do it verbally rather than writing wise. But they started to play this different game, And a brief synopsis to give you here, that if you didn't hear that series, listen to it and I'll explain it in more detail. But here I'll give you some highlights of it just in the brief synopsis. When social media popped up and started to draw attention, the mainstream media realized that they were starting to lose their audience to social media. So they decided to try to be like social media and angle for anything that would draw attention, even if it was not of the same level of substance that the mainstream media is known for producing, or at least it was known for producing. In other words, they started to dumb down their work to try to appeal to a larger audience of people, such as people who would watch 30-second videos on TikTok. Now, the people who watch 30-second videos on TikTok all day are not the same people who sit and watch a 30-minute news program, because they simply don't want the same thing. The problem with this process that the mainstream media jumped into is that they lost their credibility in this process, because if I'm watching a TikToker do dances, I'm expecting to see a TikToker do dances. If I turn on the news or mainstream media, I'm expecting to see what I expect from mainstream media, which ain't a TikToker doing dances, not the same level of substance. I don't want that from the mainstream media, but the mainstream decided to try to play a game that is not the game they should be in, and they messed up their own business. All right, we don't want the same thing. If I turn on NBC, I don't want the same thing I get when I open up Instagram. All right, I'm not looking for the same thing. If it was, then we wouldn't need two different entities. We would just have Instagram, there'd be nothing else. So mainstream media trying to be like social media, they failed because they can never replicate it. And now here we are, and people don't trust the mainstream media. And there's a reason for this. The same way that if Instagram or TikTok tried to become like NBC or CBS, they would lose their credibility, because you're trying to play a game that you shouldn't be playing in the first place. I'll give you another example. It was, I can't remember what company this was. I think it was McDonald's. And this is something I heard somebody say in a presentation. This is several years ago at a business event. And it was a recording that I had purchased. So I had access to this presentation. This person threw this out as an example, that McDonald's, I believe it was McDonald's, they had posted their first quarterly earnings loss in several years after they gave the reason for their quarterly earnings loss. This was several years ago, by the way. It's not something that happened this year. And they gave the reason for the loss was that they had realized that replicating this concept of the dollar menu, selling items on your menu for $1, was not going to work for them to actually keep turning a profit. And it was a kind of a joke, because in the context of this little anecdote being shared, the presenter was saying that you got to be careful that you are not playing business reactively. In other words, you shouldn't look around at what other businesses are doing and react to it by trying to do the same thing that they're doing, because you don't know their economics, you don't know their setup, you don't know their systems, and you don't know if they have something in place that allows that to work for them, but you don't have that thing in place, so it wouldn't work for you, even if you copied what you see on the surface. Same way that if you follow somebody on the internet and it looks like they're making a lot of money and they post on Instagram 3 times a day, that doesn't mean if you post on Instagram 3 times a day, you're going to start making the same amount as them, because you have no idea what else they're doing when they're posting 3 times a day. In addition to that three posts, what else are they doing is making their business work? It may not have anything to do with the Instagram or the number of posts on Instagram, or even what they say on Instagram is making them the money. It's other things. They're just using Instagram to draw your attention, but that's not the whole game. This is the problem that people often run into when you try to replicate what you see on the surface of another person without finding out what's going on underneath the surface of another person, because we can only see the surface. We can't see what else is happening. You can only see what's on the front line. You can't see everything else that's taking place. It's kind of like if someone decides to open a burger shop in town and you say, well, we can make better burgers and better fries than McDonald's, so we can beat them, because you tasted McDonald's burger and fries and said we can make a better burger and a better fry. The problem is McDonald's business does not do what it does because of the quality of the burger and the quality of the fries. It does what it does because of the quality of the system. So if you don't understand the system that McDonald's has, then it doesn't really matter that you have a better burger and a better fries, because that ain't the reason why they are who they are. Does everyone understand this? So make sure you're not jumping into a game that you're not supposed to be in, which is the mistake that the mainstream media made in trying to compete against social media. They shouldn't have tried to compete. They should have just said, okay, some people are going to siphon off and they're going to be looking at social media instead of looking at us. That's just what it is. But they tried to play a game they shouldn't have played, and this is how they killed themselves faster than they would have got killed any other way. Moving on to point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is how the mainstream media, why the mainstream media is dying. Number 2, as I just said, they lost that game, but they're still trying to play. They're still trying to play. Despite all of this, it's clear that they have lost. Unanimous decision. They lost this battle of trying to fight against, they tried to fight against the social media, and they lost, but they're still trying to play. They have lost, again, unanimous decision, and they're still angling. And when I say play the game, here's what they're doing. Mainstream media is angling for clicks. Bad idea. Still claiming that they are credible and that they should be listened to on important subjects. So you can't do both at the same time. If you're aiming for clicks, that means you're going to do things to get people to click, which is usually something that gives them a quick dopamine hit, which might be something that is simply not true, some sensational headline. It may be something that is a fact taken out of context, also known as propaganda. It could be an outright lie, also known as propaganda. And it could be just a flipping of the truth, which is another form of propaganda. So you have lies, you have facts taken out of context, and you have just a twisting up of the truth, just hand picking things. These are all forms of propaganda. And when the mainstream media engages in too much propaganda, they always have. When you engage in it so often that it becomes the main course of what you do, eventually people start to see through that. And even the least intelligent person, the least quote unquote educated person, eventually understands what you're doing, and they stop believing you because you're supposed to be believed. This is what Jeff Bezos told his team at the Washington Post. Y'all don't know Jeff Bezos is the Amazon guy. He owns the Washington Post as well. And he told his editorial staff at the Washington Post that, hey, we are not going to endorse a presidential candidate this year as a newspaper. And a lot of his editorial staff was upset that the Washington Post was not going to endorse a presidential candidate. And Jeff Bezos came out and explained to them that we are in the business of giving people the objective truth. That's the business that the news is in. And if we're going to be in the news business, we not only need to give people the objective truth, but we also need to have the trust of the people that we are trying to give them the objective truth. So if we come out and say we're endorsing the Democrat or endorsing the Republican, well, what does that tell the audience? It tells the audience that we are leaning to the left or we're leaning to the right. That's a problem because we're in the business of being objective. So we can't be in the business of being objective and then say we're going to endorse the person on the left or the person on the right as if that's some type of badge of honor. That's hurting our business in the long term because there's only an election every 4 years. We got to sell newspapers every day. Jeff Bezos was 100% correct. And this is where the mainstream media is losing because a lot of people who work in the mainstream, they have been, and they're people too. They're humans. They get time off of work. And guess what? They got phones just like you. They have social media apps just like you. They get the dopamine hits from clicking on notifications and swiping and scrolling on Instagram and TikTok just like you. And they have fallen victim to the same nonsense that social media has caused you to fall victim to, which is always trying to go for the next hit of the drug. It is an addiction. This stuff is an addiction. That's why social media is more popular than mainstream media, because the mainstream media show might be an hour, whereas social media is 30 seconds. And you can consume how many of those in an hour? What? If you consume 30 seconds a piece without stopping, you can consume 120 different pieces of content in 1 hour if they're all 30 seconds a piece. But if I have a 60-minute show, you got to watch the entire 60-minute show. You're getting one piece of content, 60 minutes worth of substance. But again, what draws more attention? All right, what sells more, folks? Snickers bars or vegetables? This is what you got to understand. So the mainstream media just made a mistake in trying to play a game they should never have entered in the first place. So they still want to be looked at as credible, yet they're trying to play like the candy aisle. All right, what do you want? You want people to think of you as a fruit or a vegetable, but you want to sell your stuff on the candy rack. You got to decide what you want to be. See, when we open social media, we know there's going to be a parody account. We know there's going to be some jokesters. We know there's going to be some trolls. We know people are saying and doing silly shit just to draw attention. We expect that on social media. We're looking forward to it. That's the reason that we use it. But when we turn on mainstream media, we want serious, logical, factual, and truthful material. If I wanted jokes, I'll open up TikTok. If I want serious information, I would have turned to the mainstream media or to a journalist to get some serious information. I know what I'm doing. I have an app on my phone where I can save articles that I want to read. I read articles by people who take time to think and write and put their thoughts into words in a way that is going to challenge me to think. If I don't want to read that shit, then I open up TikTok and I look at some silly shit or some Instagram or whatever. Everybody understands this. The mainstream media, how nobody said this. They didn't have a vice president of common sense to say, hey, this is probably a bad idea for us. And then even if you could not have predicted the future, maybe a few years in, you could have said, hey, do y'all notice what's taking place here? How we've lost our credibility and we're losing this game that we should never gotten in the first place? Mainstream media is trying to compete with social media in a battle that they cannot win, are not winning, and will continue to lose as long as they keep trying to play. And the problem is, I think they're going to keep trying to play. Mainstream media companies are usually big conglomerates, and if you know anything about working within bureaucracies, is that things happen very slowly. And change, even when it's necessary, happen very slowly. If you as a human, for example, give you more on this social media versus mainstream media, if you're going to wrestle an alligator, would you rather wrestle the alligator in the water or on land? Now, maybe some of you are saying, I don't want to wrestle an alligator at all. I think that's a good idea for most of you. But if you had to wrestle the alligator, would you rather wrestle on water or on land? I think most of you, if you're smart, the answer should be on land. You should wrestle an alligator on land. Why? Because on land, you have a chance to win. In the lake, you have no chance because the alligator has more experience than you. It's going to pull you. You got more experience on the land than the alligator has on the land. And in the water, alligator has more experience than you. It's going to pull you underwater. You can't breathe underwater. Alligator can. You're going to drown, and you're going to be lunch for the alligator. All right, this is where the mainstream media has failed itself. All right, it's a human trying to wrestle an alligator in the lake. Bad idea. Point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is why the mainstream media is dying. Number 3, there are 5 stages of grief that human beings go through. This is a thing, the 5 stages of grief. If this was more of my area of talking about things, I'd do a whole episode just on this. I will not, but I will mention it here today. Any of you works in therapy or mental health, you are familiar with these 5 stages. The 5 stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. These are the 5 stages of grief. This happens to anyone who's going through any type of grief. I was talking to a friend maybe 2 days ago by text message, and she told me, and this is not an old woman, this is a woman around the age of 40, maybe a little bit younger. I hadn't talked to her in a few months, and she told me that her significant other, her partner, had died. And in between the last time I talked to her and now, last time I spoke to her was about 6 months ago. And then when I was just texting her the other day, she told me that her significant other had died. Now, and at the same time, one of my best friends growing up, his wife died. And again, these are people younger than me. I'm 42 years of age. My friend from one of my best friends growing up, he's a year younger than me, and less than a year younger than me. And this woman I'm talking about, she is probably a year or maybe 2 younger than me. And both of them had significant others die. Point is, they both go through these 5 stages of grief. The first one is denial, i.e., this didn't happen. Second stage is anger. I can't believe this happened. I'm mad that it happened. Number 3 is bargaining. All right, can I figure out how can we negotiate here? Number 4 is depression. I just feel terrible and I don't know if anything will ever get better. And number 5 is acceptance. Okay, this happened and I'm moving forward. Those are the 5 stages. Right now, the mainstream media is on stage 2. Stage 2 is anger. And the grief that the mainstream media is dealing with is the fact that they themselves are dying. It's not their friend dying, they're dying. And right now they're in the anger stage. The anger stage is mainstream media getting mad at everyone who is not part of the mainstream media, but is part of the media, period. People like me, podcasters, TikTokers, YouTubers, influencers, anyone who has the ears of the audience that used to belong to the mainstream media, but now are going other places. The mainstream media people are getting mad at people like us because they don't control the narrative anymore the way they used to. They don't have a monopoly over it the way that they used to. That's what they're mad about. See, this is the stage where the mainstream media starts blaming independent people and independent platform creators for the continued disregard and distrust of the mainstream media. So what they're saying, and essentially, mainstream media folks are saying, oh, the reason why people are not listening to us when they should be listening to us is because they're listening to all these other platforms. So we got to do something about these other platforms and crack down on them and crack down on their lies and misinformation so that we can bring everybody back to listening to us. See, they're in the stage of anger and acting as if their incredulity is going to bring things back to how they were. And again, this is why they're in the 5 stages of grief. That's why there are 5 stages. They're only on stage 2 because they don't realize that it ain't going back to where it was. All right, that person died, they ain't coming back. It's over. All right, and this is what you have to accept. See, they haven't gotten to acceptance yet. Acceptance is stage 5. They're only on stage 2. You understand? So it's going to get worse before it gets better, mainstream media, if anybody wanted to know. So they are getting mad at the independent platforms. And you heard people in the mainstream even saying this. After the election, specifically, the 2024 election, you heard people in the mainstream on CNN, MSNBC, saying things like, you know what, the government needs to crack down on these independent podcasters and influencers the same way that they hold us to regulations, like the FCC regulates what mainstream media can do. Hey, we need to put some type of restrictions on these independent platforms. These are people on TV saying this stuff. And they're saying this not because they really believe it's necessary, because the mainstream media lies all the time, despite the regulations that they allegedly have above them. They're mad that they don't have the attention anymore. And when they keep losing attention, what happens is they lose money, they can't get contracts, and people are going to lose jobs. So that's what they're really mad about. They're not mad of the attention, because they were still making the same money and business was still going smoothly. They wouldn't care that there are other people podcasting and influencing and YouTubing. They wouldn't care. What they care about is that they're going to lose money. Anytime you want to know why someone is doing something that you can't quite understand why they're doing it through your own thinking, just ask yourself, just say the following thing to yourself: follow the money. This is the reason why they're mad, because the money's going to go. They're losing money right now. That's why they're really mad. Same reason journalism died is because journalists don't get paid to do journalism anymore, because nobody wants to pay for journalism, because social media is more attention grabbing. So companies just stop investing in journalism. Now there's no journalism. Now we don't know who's telling the truth and who's lying. So then people decided, well, if I can't get the truth from a journalist or from the mainstream media, I guess I got to listen to this podcast. I guess I got to go find somebody on TikTok. I guess I got to start scrolling through YouTube so I can find the truth. And then people find people that they like, and that becomes their new audience. This is what happened. This is what's happening right now, literally today. So this is the stage. Again, mainstream media outlets start blaming everyone other than themselves as if they had nothing to do with what's happening right now. That's the stage of anger. On the contrary, the mainstream media had everything to do with this process and their own demise. So on this second stage of grief, they're mad at everything and everyone who is taking away their market share and taking away their attention, as if they were not trying to be these very people. See, they're just not good at it. That's the problem. See, the problem is not TikTok and Instagram and YouTube for the mainstream media. The problem is that they try to be TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. They try to be like the people on these platforms. They're just not good at doing it, and they failed. That's why they're mad. Now, see, if all your favorite mainstream media people would just start a TikTok or a YouTube and be just as popular on social media as they are in mainstream media, none of them will have a problem right now because they still be winning. But see, they're losing. That's why they're mad. So they're using the independent platforms, who are now their competitors, as a scapegoat to blame for their own self-created problem. The next step is going to be, again, trying to bargain with independent publishers. So mark my words when I tell you what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next is that you're going to see more and more mainstream people creating independent platforms, which operate a lot differently than the mainstream. This is the reason why you see a lot of people on who you know from being on mainstream shows. So people being on platforms like ESPN, MSNBC, CNN, Fox, NBC, CBS. You see a lot of these people starting their own podcasts now. You see this, right? You see people like Shannon Sharp from ESPN. He has his own podcast. Stephen A. Smith has his own podcast. You see people like Megyn Kelly, who's worked at Fox and briefly at NBC. She has her own platform. So you see a lot of people who have traditionally been mainstream, and some of them still working mainstream, but then they also have their own independent platforms. You're going to see more and more mainstream people starting their own platforms. Why? First of all, because people are not going to invest in mainstream personalities anymore because the money's not there. And secondly, because these folks understand that this is where everything is shifting, and they either got to get in the game or they're going to get left behind. So they have no choice. So remember that I told you, you're going to see a lot more of these people starting their own platforms. And now the problem is, for some of them, is that independent platforms don't work the same way that the mainstream platforms work. In the mainstream, your audience is not the viewers. In the mainstream, your audience are your bosses, the producers, because they're the ones who write your paychecks. If you keep appeasing them, you get to keep your job. See, that's the issue with working in the mainstream, is that you don't have to appease the audience. You got to appease your boss. In the mainstream, on the other hand, on the independent world, on the other hand, you have to appease the audience. See, my audience right now, or the people who I need to appease, are you, the people who listen to and watch what I say. If you don't like what I'm saying, then I have no platform and I have no leverage. I have nothing. I can't do anything. And the mainstream folks, they're so used to saying whatever their bosses want them to say. What they come to realize when they try to do things independently is that, oh, what my bosses want to hear is not the same as what the people want to hear. And they realize, I don't know what to do. Eventually, that's where they get. This is how somebody like Don Lemon, who worked at CNN for many years, he can do very well working for the mainstream because, again, he only had to appease his bosses and they liked what he was saying. But then when he found himself out of a job, he gets into the independent space, and the same bullshit that worked on CNN doesn't work on YouTube. It doesn't work. Even though he has the exact same message, is not hitting the same way that it was hitting before. Why? Because he's playing a different game that doesn't reward him for the same things. So this is the adjustment that some have to make. Now, some make this adjustment pretty well. I think Shannon Sharp's done a great job of making this adjustment. I think Stephen A. Smith is okay. I'm using him as an example. I think Megyn Kelly is great at it. And there are others, and that I don't know all of them, but there are others. And the adjustment is, do you keep it real? Can you keep it real? And usually, and let me tell you the key here, the people who were keeping it real, even when they were working in the mainstream, the adjustment to the independent route is seamless. But see, if you were bullshitting in the mainstream just to keep your check, your adjustment is going to be a really rough one. It's going to be a rough ride. All that said, let's recap today's class. Again, this is part one. I don't think I told you that. This is a two-part series. Why the mainstream media is dying. Tomorrow we'll get into part two. Number one, social media influenced the mainstream to play a different game, and they should never have gotten into this. They should have never adjusted to what the opponent is doing. Anytime that you are in any type of competition, you want to make the opponent adjust to you. You don't allow them to make you adjust to what they're doing. And this is where mainstream faulted. That was their first mistake. Second, they lost the game. All right, they adjusted to what everybody else was doing, and they lost. And they're still trying to play, and they're still losing. And the more they try to play, the worse it gets. And number three, 5 stages of grief. Number 1, denial. Number 2, anger. Number 3, bargaining. Number 4, depression. Number 5, acceptance. Right now, the mainstream media is only on stage 2. They're mad right now. They're mad at everyone other than themselves, even though they're the reason that they're in the position that they're in. Tomorrow, we're going to continue on this and tell you where things are going to go from here. Make sure you go to workonyourgameuniversity.com, secure me as your coach, get into our programs. We have different programs. We have group programs for those of you who may be on more of the starting out level. We have independent programs for those of you who want to work with me directly and you know specifically what you want, where you want to go. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre, all